in the world right now. And this All-Star, it will be distributed in over 200 countries and territories, just checking my notes, and in over 60 languages. And players in this league, now not referring to All-Stars, but overall in this league now, represent 45 countries and are roughly 30% of this league, and a number that's continuing to grow, including, of course, from some of the very best players, MVP quality players in this league. So, we're very excited about the ongoing prospects for this game, both in terms of participation and in terms of interest on a global basis. So, again, thank you all for being here. We're thrilled to be here. We're looking forward to some really fun events tonight and a great game tomorrow. And with that, Tim, happy to answer any questions.
Great. We'll start here in the third row on the outside. Tim
Reynolds with the Associated Press. Adam, good to see you.
Good to see you.
Congrats on getting your voice back. We were worried yesterday.
Sort of, yeah.
Good enough.
Yeah.
As you know, the 65-game rule has been a talking point amongst players pretty much all season. And then by and large, it seems as though there's an understanding and an acceptance that something had to be done. To that end, there are also some players that will be Supermax eligible if they can get an award. Tyrese Halliburton's on pace to play 63 games. I understand why the rule is in place. Is it time to separate the Supermax from the awards?
My answer is I'm not sure. Tim, as you know, a lot of thought went into the 65-game demarcation. Not only was it collectively bargained with the players, but we spent extensive time leading up to collective bargaining, talking to all the various constituencies in the league, most importantly, the coaches, the general managers, individual players directly. And as was built into your question, the notion was we needed to further incentivize players, particularly star players, to play more games. So I'm not ready to say that it isn't working so far. I can tell you that the number of games that players have participated in is up this season. And interestingly enough, injuries are actually down. So whether that's meaningful data yet, I don't know. I think the right time to take a further look at this rule is at the end of the season, when we see sort of at least have a year under our belt.
All right, second row in on the right, two in. Jeff
Zogate, USA Today. Adam, I won't go over all the offensive numbers, but scoring is up considerably over the past decade, more 70-point individual performances in the past 2 years than the previous 40. And one NBA coach said that defense was being legislated out of the game. What is your view on the offensive explosion? Is it good for the league? Does it make for a better product? And then is the competition committee looking at anything that might sway a couple rules changes in favor of the defense?
Yeah, Jeff, so first of all, just in terms of the difference from last season to this, we're up approximately 1 point per game, just to be clear. And I want to dispel any notion that the league feels, or the league office necessarily feels, that high-scoring games in the abstract are good. I think what we want are competitive games. That's what's most important to us, and that's what we hear from our fans as well. I think there's a lot happening here, and I've talked to a lot of coaches and a lot of players about it. I think, first of all, the skill level is off the charts. I think that what we're seeing is now in this league, every player at every position has to be able to shoot the basketball. You're seeing this global pool of talent coming into the league, some of the best athletes in the world who can frankly just shoot the lights out, and I think that's partly what's responsible for the increased scoring. I disagree with people who feel that teams aren't playing defense. I mean, you've been covering for this league a long time. The defensive intensity is there. Defensive players are asked to cover larger areas of the court than they had to historically. Even this was something Larry was talking about during his interview Friday. So I actually am pleased with the state of the game. Having said that, I know there are some coaches who feel that we've hampered in some ways defensive players' ability to play defense, at least the way it used to be played In part, that's been very intentional. There was a period of time in this league when people thought that the game had become too physical and we'd taken away some of the aesthetic beauty from the game. I was one of those people who felt that way, in the 90s. Whether or not, there need to be any adjustments or now is something that we listen to our coaches, we listen to our players, and the competition will continue to consider. And I think one thing I'd say, people think that fans like high-scoring games. I think fans like to see players have that ability to use these extraordinary talents. On the other hand, I think what we hear from fans as well is they like defensive intensity, and I think they want players to be able to play physical defense, but not in a way that it hampers, as I said, offensive players from using their incredible skills. So I'm pleased with where the game is, but it is something we'll continue to look at.
All right, we'll go third row in the middle. Joe?
Joe Var, Athletic. Adam, I guess I was going to ask about the scoring, but since Jeff did that, I'll move on to the bundle between the streaming bundle that was announced, I think, recently. Just what was your initial reaction to that? How does it affect the ongoing negotiations that you have?
My initial reaction to it was, I think it's positive to the extent that consumers have more choices in the way in which they can receive sports and in which they can receive NBA basketball. Other than that, I don't have a lot more to say because I'm just learning about it.
Okay, standing here on the left, Tim?
Tim Bonsters from ESPN. Adam, you were with the league when Michael Jordan left the league a quarter century ago. And obviously, we're here for LeBron James, his 20th All-Star game this year. For a generation, he's sort of been the face of the league, arguably. I know we're not sure how long he's going to play, but at some point, probably in the fairly near future, he will not be around anymore. And I was curious what your thoughts are on sort of what the league will look like after that, and what your thoughts are in terms of sort of replacing him as the face of the league at some point moving forward.
Interesting question, Tim. I would say, well, I would never anoint another player to be the next LeBron James, just in the same way when Michael retired. And as you're right, I was part of the league then. That question often came up and said, who's going to be the next Michael Jordan? And I remember at the time, David Stern or others were saying, whoever demonstrates on the court that they should be. That's what's so wonderful about the competition and a league. I'd also say I think the league is in fantastic hands. I mean, just look at the All-Stars that we're going to be seeing competing tomorrow night. As I said, from the time that Michael retired to now, look at the magnitude of the pool of international players coming into this league. Look at the amount of basketball that's being played on a global basis. I think it's again, that these new players aren't anointed. They demonstrate to the world, they demonstrate to the league that they deserve to be viewed in that same rare position as players like Michael and Kobe and LeBron and others. So let's just watch the competition. But I'm certain people in this room have their own ideas looking at some of these young guys, who those players could be. But as I said, the level of basketball, and even you talk to some of the greats from the past, will say it's remarkable to watch what these guys now physically are able to do on the floor.
Second row in the middle.
Yes, Theo Quintar, French journalist now based in San Antonio. My question is very simple. What can you tell us about maybe the NBA Paris game next year? Maybe in Paris, maybe with the Spurs?
I can say that we will be back playing a regular season game again in Paris. There's some discussions ongoing about which arena we will play in. We stay tuned in terms of the Spurs playing in Paris. I can tell you that Victor Wembanyama was involved in the Rising Stars game last night. He's in town, and it's certainly something that he very much would like to see his team, the San Antonio Spurs, playing in Paris.
All right, we'll go fourth row on the right. Howard?
Howard Beck from The Ringer. Hey, Adam.
Hey, Howard.
I think it was 2017 that you and Chris Paul had the conversation about the All-Star game being at that moment. And you guys started talking about all these ways to then innovate. You guys brought in the e-limiting, created the player draft, and scrapped East versus West for a while, various innovations on the player draft. I know the e-limiting itself maybe had mixed results, but the player draft was actually, it seemed to me, pretty popular with the fans and certainly with us, the very hard-to-please media crowd. You've scrapped all that again to go back to East versus West. I know you've said tradition because you're in Indiana, but But my suspicion is that if it had all worked to the satisfaction of the league, you guys would have continued those innovations. So what was the rationale behind going back to the old way, if you can say that without using the word traditional, or any version thereof?
Operating under those rules, we returned to the East versus West format and the 48-minute game format because we thought what we were doing was not working. I'd say, I think people uniformly were critical of last year's All-Star game and felt it was not a competitive game. And it was not a position held solely by the league. I think the players collectively recognized as well that it wasn't what they wanted to see either, that they had not put their best foot forward. And I'd say Andre Iguodala now, who is the executive director, former player of the Players Association, I think shares that view with the league office that we're not necessarily looking for players to go out there as if it's, the finals certainly, but we need players to play defense. We need them to care about this game. And the feeling was that maybe, and I'll take responsibility for it, as you know, I used to run something called NBA Entertainment, that we'd gotten carried away a bit with the entertainment aspect. And by that, I'm not just talking about the halftime or the intros per se. One of the things we heard from the players, and I think this goes to the draft, was on one hand, now you're telling us you want us to play this as if it were a real game, but there's nothing about it that feels like a real game. You have us standing up on stage, operating through this draft. Then once the intros start, there's all, we're standing there forever. We don't get to go through our usual routines. Then come halftime, you're adding not just a little bit of extra time, but a lot of extra time. So we get cold in the locker rooms. And I think we sat down with the players and we listened to them. We said, all right, we have to return to basketball, back to basketball, to be judged. I think sometimes when you're in the market for an all-star game and you're having fun at all the events and the parties and all those other things, people often are saying to me, I've been doing this for a lot of years, before the game even takes place on Sunday night, it's been a fantastic all-star weekend. And then, of course, if the game is lousy, then you all just doing your jobs and representing what's happening here to the world, the reports are it was a lousy all-star because the game wasn't that exciting. And frankly, fans are able to vote by what they watch too. They have so many options. So the thought was here, we sat down with the players, we said, let's return to a focus on the game of basketball. Let's come pretty close to your typical routine. We still want the opportunity to introduce to fans around the world the all-star rosters. We still want to have a little bit of fun at halftime, but so just add a slight amount of time and let's see what we get. My sense is it's a combination of discussions that the leadership of the players are having with the all-stars. I think discussions Joe Dumars is having directly with players, frankly, having Joe Dumars and his credibility in the league office. I think we're going to see a good game tomorrow night.
All right, eighth row in the middle.
And I
Robert,
didn't
can you
use
raise
the
your
word
hand?
tradition.
Thank you for that.
So we can see you there. Okay.
Adam, Robert O'Connell, Wall Street Journal. Just returning quickly to the offense-defense balance question. It's been a kind of truism around the league from players, coaches, that defense is still what wins in the playoffs, that they're operating under a different set of rules almost in summer than they are the rest of the season. Before you get to competition committee stuff, is there any concern about the game that fans watch throughout the year looking different than decides championships? Are you worried about an imbalance there?
I'm not talk about. I think it's a function of an 82 game and then 4 rounds of playoffs. And I think it's only natural that when you get to the point where these are playoff games that are determining whether you so-called win or go home, that there's going to be an added level of intensity. I don't think, and people often ask me, well, if players aren't going to play at a certain intensity level for 82 games, does that mean your season should be shorter? I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think people understand there's a regular season, they understand there's playoffs, and they understand the difference between the finals and the first round and a game 7 and a game 1. I think it's part of the rhythm of the game. So the short answer is no, I'm not concerned.
Seventh row, second in on the right. Raise your hand there for me. Thank you.
Hi, Adam. Lenwell, Open Court Basketball. My question is, Howard elaborated how the All-Star game itself has been reinvented a couple of times in the past years. What has changed in the past 42 years is the roster size. It's 12, even though back then we had 7 teams less. Now with an expansion maybe looming, and so much talent in the league, and NBA rosters having an extra spot these days. Do you think, or is there a plan that this might be added 1-2 roster spots to the All-Star game in the coming years?
There's no plan now to add roster spots. I think part of the issue is, even though you're right, we've expanded the number of teams, we haven't expanded the number of minutes, and there's still only one ball. And then the question is, how do you distribute those minutes among the All-Stars? And I think also when we sat down with the players discussed this during bargaining, there is that sense of specialness in being an All-Star or being one of 24 as opposed to being one of a larger number. I mean, I never say never to anything, but it seems to be resolved right now that this is the right size of the teams.
Fifth row on your left on the end, Kristen.
Hi, Adam. Kristen
Hey.
Peak, Yahoo Sports. This year's draft, you guys are moving it to 2 days. What went into that? Was it more teams, that wanted more time in the second round, or, was it more drawing more interest to the players in the second round and making it a 2-day thing? And are you guys just going to reevaluate the success of this plan and then go forward in the future?
The answer is to begin with your last question, which is, sure, we'll reevaluate after we see how it works. I'll say you hit on the two primary reasons. Number one, we did hear from our teams that these second round picks have become increasingly important, and their ability to reset, not just to have more time, which we've offered between picks in the second round, going from 2 minutes to 4 minutes, but in addition, the opportunity to reset after the first round of the draft, to reassess what their needs are and have that day to consider that, was something they were very interested in. So that was from the team standpoint. But then from the league standpoint, we were pleased. I mean, in the old days, the draft didn't even used to be in prime time. And we went from prime time on ESPN to prime time on ABC and ESPN. And the feeling was, once I used to do the second round, of course, Mark Tatum is here, deputy commissioner, now does the second round. Sometimes, given the level of interest in this league, it seemed, frankly, a little bit silly that we were standing there at 12 a.m. at night calling off names for the second round of our draft. And to the extent that our partner ESPN came to us and said, there is sufficient interest that if you're interested, we think this merits primetime coverage on ESPN. So for us, it was pretty straightforward. I mean, of course, we needed the Players Association agreement to do that. And it wasn't universally popular. There were some people who felt maybe we should just get it all done in one night. But I think for me, I felt sort of combining all those different interests, the opportunity to give that additional exposure to these second round picks, the opportunity to talk about why these picks are so valuable to teams, how deep the rosters are these days. It seemed to me like a no-brainer, but you never know. We'll get through this first draft, and then I'm sure we'll sit down with the players, we'll sit down with our partners and see whether it worked.
Fifth row in the middle.
Hey, Adam, over here. Sebastian Hernandez for Hispanic Sports Media. You talk about the fans. You talk about always NBA is reinventing itself. This year we have the Steph versus Sabrina. So is there any plans to add more events like this one for the future years or something like that?
I take the question is are there plans to add more integration of the WNBA or women's game into All-Star festivities? Possibly. I mean, I've been encouraged by the amount of interest in Sabrina and Steph engaging in this three-point contest. Of course, let's see how it goes. I think it's highly anticipated. Incidentally, so much credit to them. I wish I could say that the league in its lab came up with this idea. This was about Steph and Sabrina, two friends who said, won't this be fantastic? I know that Steph cares a lot about the women's game, the opportunity to bring more attention to this fantastic shooting. And so I'm excited to see it. I'm really encouraged. I'd also add, it's not just enormous increase in interest in the WNBA over the last several years, but we're seeing it in women's college basketball as well. So I'm highly encouraged, just on behalf of the game of basketball, that we're seeing so much growth. I mean, I should add, I could have said this earlier, in addition to being the fastest growing sport in the world, we are the #1 participation sport in the United States, and that team sport. And that's because not just with boys, but girls are playing the sport in record numbers. So I've said this before, I think that increasingly in this league, the opportunity to have more female refs, more female coaches, more focus on women's basketball, more opportunity for these leagues to support each other and cross promote, I think is just fantastic on behalf of the game of basketball.
Ninth row on the end. Jared, if you can raise your hand. Thank you.
Jared Weiss from The Athletic. Players being frustrated with officiating is always going to be inherent to the game, but a lot of players have complained about not getting feedback, not feeling heard or communicated with when they're getting texts. They're frustrated about calls. There's been so many respect for the game rules put in place for players over the last few years. How do you balance at this point having the respect for the officiating with also the respect for the players and making sure that they feel heard?
Yeah, I'm so sympathetic to both players who feel that an official missed a call, and sometimes they do, and I'm incredibly sympathetic to officials who have some of the hardest job in sports and are under a microscope and occasionally, of course, do miss calls, and we acknowledge when they do. I think what makes me most frustrated are precisely the issues you're referring to, the communication issues sort of between players and officials. I feel that's an area we should be able to do a better job, both ways. Both, and I put that on the category, as you said, of respect for the game. I'm really encouraged to have Andre Iguodala as a partner to talk about these issues because he's not just a former player, 19 years at the league, multiple championships. He understands the pressure. He understands the issue. And I think there's a real willingness on behalf of officials as well to do better. So I think this is a real area of focus for us that we're going to be working on. It's easy to say respect for the game. I think people recognize that how players, how the communication works, it's not a typical workplace. It's, we have to take into account the high stress they're under, but it's something that all of us, even if we're not basketball experts, are in a position to judge when we see that dynamic. And particularly now when so much cameras, so much high fidelity audio, we're able to pick up a lot of what's being said. There just has to be a two-way sense of respect. And I'm sympathetic to the frustration and feel it's an area where we can make progress.
Third row in the middle, Mike.
Hey,
Hey, Mike.
last year you were touting the amount of teams still in playoff contention and kind of the parity around the league. And then the CBA seemed to try to create more parity by lessening the salary payroll disparity. The league has always seemed to be kind of more boom times when there are dynastic level teams, really good teams for a number of years that kind of lord over the league to some degree. Why did you feel like it's in the league's best interest to try to drive parity at the cost of those kind of outsized teams that seem to be so popular and help the business interests?
Well, I would say it slightly differently. We're not trying to drive parity as much as parity of opportunity. I think in this league, superstar players are still going to win a disproportionate number of championships, and well-managed franchises are still going to win a disproportionate number of franchises. Where I thought it wasn't good for the game and it wasn't good for the league, that there was no question that there's a correlation between spending and the quality of the team. And that I understand that dynasties are something that fans will get behind. At the same time, what you hear from fans is they want those teams to be created the right way. And so people aren't that interested in seeing teams buy championships, so to speak. And so we felt by leveling the playing field, so by creating more parity in terms of opportunity, that would help us continue on that continuum towards a more competitive 30-team league. And if you look back over the last at least 2 decades in this league through successive collective bargaining agreements, I think we've made progress. And I'll just add that this is not just a league interest. I think it's a player one too, because if there's going to be a draft, who wants to get drafted to a team that has a significant disadvantage because of the size of their market and their opportunity to generate revenue? And I just lastly say, look no further than the NFL. I mean, we're a very different league, different number of games, different impact of star players, but I marvel at the job they've done in terms of creating a truly competitive league where you hardly ever hear discussions about market size. And I'll just add, I use Victor Wembanyama as an example. I think that for people who've been covering the league for a while, certainly 20 years ago, probably even 10 years ago, if a transcendent player like Victor Wembanyama were drafted were the first pick in the draft, and he had gone to a small market, people would have said, "Oh, that's too bad. He's not going to have the same economic opportunity, or not as many people are going to." Nobody says that now. He goes to San Antonio, and people say, "Oh, opportunity to play under Coach Pop." R.C. Buford, with his experience, San Antonio organization experience with big men and international players, and I think Victor feels the same way in a digital world. That every game is available on a smartphone everywhere in the world. And so I think given that in the long term, both competitive and business interests of the league, we're better off having a league where there's more competitive fairness and opportunity among all the teams in the league.
All right, we're going to take two more, starting third row on the right with Brad.
Brad Townsend, Dallas Morning News. I want to get your perspective on the new Adelson Dumont governorship in Dallas, whether that in any way signals a deepening of the league's relationship in gaming, and then also any reflection you might have of Mark Cuban's 24 years of governorship.
Yeah, on Adelson Dumont ownership, no, I don't think that signals any increase in gaming for the league. They have gaming interests, but those are independent of their interest in owning the team. I mean, as we always say, you sort of park sort of your day job. It's one of the reasons why we have in place the salary system we do, so that whatever you're doing off the court is independent of the rules that you're operating under. And all of our gaming rules will apply to the Adelson Dumont families in the same way they do to other teams. And I also, if you look at the governor, Patrick Dumont's lifelong interest in basketball, he's somebody who's been talking to the league for years about potential team ownership, about their level of interest. They operate on a global basis. All the things I talked about earlier in terms of these fantastic attributes of the NBA are something things they're very focused on. In terms of Mark, he's had an incredible impact on this league. I mean, I have been with the league through his entire tenure of his ownership. From his earliest days in the league, he pushed us hard. He came in as a technologist. I think it was almost precisely in 2000, right around, I was saying this on Friday with our technology summit, we began those technology summits in 2000 in San Francisco. I believe Mark was a panelist at our very first one. I think he was every year. And he's someone that I've built very close relationship over the years, despite some of the back and forth, even with Mark and David publicly and a little bit with me. There's always been very respectful relationships. I think he pushed us to be more early days, not just more focused on technology, but more of a marketing organization, was something that he always cared about, certainly on the basketball side. Again, putting aside some of the public stuff, I know he's a lot about the officiating program. Again, behind closed doors, we've worked together. He'll speak for himself. I'm not saying we've satisfied him all along the way. He's been frustrated over aspects of the game, but he's truly been a game-changing owner in this league, and he's had great success, obviously in a championship, but also, competitive teams, most of the time during his tenure. And he's been a very active participant in league matters, whether it's been our media committee or at Board of Governors meetings. He's never hesitated to speak his mind. So I'm pleased that he's still, he's not the troll governor of the team anymore, but he's still a very significant investor in the Dallas Mavericks. As he's made clear, he's not going anywhere. If you just tune in a game, he still seems to be standing in the same spot he was when he was the governor. And he continues to text, email, call us at the league office when he has something he wants to share with us.
Final question, fourth row in the middle, Dan.
Dan Wanke with the Los Angeles Times. This is year 4 now for the G League Ignite, and I believe they're 2-19 this season. I'm curious, kind of, what's been the overall evaluation as you guys entered into this sort of academy process with Ignite, and as image and likeness money only increases in amateur sports, what's sort of the NBA's appetite to kind of keep up with the Joneses, I guess, on that front?
It's an important question, I think, where we're going in terms of youth basketball. At the time that we formed Team Ignite, I think I was very public about the fact that I favored going to a minimum age of 18 instead of 19. As we sat down with our players to discuss that, and then essentially the college market changed, the introduction of collectives, NIL, the transfer portal, a lot changed around us. And then we came to a consensus when we sat down with the players and our teams that we were better off staying at 19. And I'd say also some of the societal concerns that were driving us to move to 18, that there seemed to be an unfairness that these players, even at the highest level, couldn't earn a living in college basketball. And we, the league and the Players Association together, were preventing them from doing that. I think sort of that dissipated because all of a sudden this great economic opportunity presented itself through these various programs at college. I think given that that's happened, I think we are in the process of reassessing Team Ignite, because now some of those same players who didn't want to be one and done players because they felt it was unfair and they wanted the ability not just to earn a living playing basketball, but to do commercial deals that weren't available to them at college, to hire professional agents, and an opportunity that wasn't available to them at college. They now, all of those same opportunities have become available to them. So, I'd add, I'm not sure what the future of Team Ignite will be, because I'm not, before there was a hole in the marketplace that we felt we were filling by doing that. And now my focus is turning to earlier development of those players. I mean, if you're seeing now what we're seeing in terms of that, close to 30% of the league of players born outside the United States, it's clear that the development is very different in many of those programs outside the United States. More of a focus on practice, less of a focus on games, which seems to be the opposite of many of the youth programs in the United States. I think that now we've begun discussions with the NCAA. The vast majority of the top players will play in college and never play in the NBA, of course. So we have a common interest in just improving the game, developing players, developing players. There's no question they're coming into the league incredibly skilled, but that doesn't necessarily translate to being team basketball players. And then what I'm hearing from some of those same coaches that may be complaining about inability to play defense is that these players are not as prepared as I'd like them to be, particularly as very high draft picks. So I think there's an opportunity for us to be part of that, the community that's developing younger players, elite players, and also, as I mentioned before, in terms of increased participation numbers, of just a more active participant in getting kids active, boys and girls, with our junior NBA and junior WNBA programs.
Thanks, Adam, and thanks to all of you for being here. Transcripts will be available on Media Central shortly. Enjoy the rest of the weekend. Thank you.
Thank you all again very much.